Muhammad's night journey was a seminal moment. It marked the ending of one period of his life and the beginning of another. He was about to begin a new and even more dangerously radical phase of his mission, in which he would abandon his tribal life completely. Rather than trying to defeat the Quraysh in Mecca, he would leave the city and start again somewhere else. One day, in a place here which used to be a small oasis, Muhammad met a group of men from the town of Yathrib, which is about 15 days camel ride to the north. The men told Muhammad about the warfare and the constant feuding that affected their community. Muhammad listened to them, and for his part, he told them about his mission, about the unity of God, about the importance of living a virtuous life, and of the rewards of heaven. Now, importantly, the men sat and were even excited by what Muhammad had to say. And this was important because it was completely different to the reaction that Muhammad was used to getting in Mecca. The meeting ended with the 6 men from Yathrib converting to Islam and agreeing to meet Muhammad once again. Conditions had now got so bad in Mecca for Muhammad, he felt that he had no choice but to get his followers to do the unthinkable, to abandon the city of their birth for Yathrib and an uncertain future in a place where they would live without any clan protection.
The community in Yathrib was made up of a number of different tribes. Some of them were pagan, the Aus and Khazraj. Some of them were Jewish, 3 main Jewish tribes. And there was a lot of disagreement, in fact, in Yathrib between different communities about how they wanted to do things. There was sort of a lot of jostling for power and prestige, and they felt that they needed a mediator. And they had heard about Muhammad, who at that time was a preacher in Mecca, growing reputation in that part of the peninsula. And they perceived in him someone who could perhaps mediate in their disputes and be a sort of neutral arbiter and come and help them resolve the problems within Yathrib.
It wasn't until the following year that an even bigger delegation came all the way from Yathrib seeking out another meeting with the Prophet Muhammad. And this time they held it under cover of darkness and in secret. And it led to a unity between the two, between the Prophet Muhammad and the community in Yathrib. I am of you and you are of me, Muhammad said. Now, this agreement, it's important to bear in mind, was something really new, something that was a radical departure, because it wasn't based on clan alliances, on family, or on tribal allegiances. It was based on something far more universal that went way beyond kinship.
It is an act of extraordinary daring, audacity, and genius, in a sense. In Arabia at this time, it was absolutely unheard of to leave your tribe, your blood group, permanently and take up permanent residence with another. It was blasphemy. The sacred tribe was the absolute value in Arabia. And for him to leave it like that and create a new kind of community, an ummah, a community based on ideology rather than relationship, was unheard of.
If the rulers of Mecca got wind of Muhammad's plans, the consequences could be disastrous. So Muhammad now had to get his followers out of the city without alerting the Quraysh. Over the next few months, a few of Muhammad's companions left the city each night, so as not to arouse any suspicions, until finally only a handful were left, including his faithful companion Abu Bakr, his young cousin Ali, and Muhammad himself. Meanwhile, the Quraysh themselves had been planning, this time to assassinate Muhammad himself. The idea was that one member of each of Mecca's clans would stab Muhammad at the same time, making it impossible for Muhammad's own clan to revenge his death, as too many people would have been involved. One night, the group surrounded his house, and believing they saw someone sleeping in Muhammad's bedroom, the assassins, with their daggers drawn, rushed into his bedroom. But instead, they found his young cousin Ali, asleep in his place. Muhammad had fled.
He's a very canny man. They're going to kill him in this assassination plot that he escapes from, goes on this wonderful journey with Abu Bakr. The thing I like of many, many aspects of it is that he made certain that everybody paid their debts. They were leaving Mecca, but every debt had to be fulfilled. There's an underlying Arabic code of honor feeding the division.
Along with Abu Bakr, Muhammad had slipped out of Mecca unnoticed. He was now en route to his new home in Yathrib. Even though Muhammad had fled, the Meccans were really determined to pursue him. And within hours, they were hot on his trail, and they chased him all the way through the punishing steep climb on the foothills of Mount Thawr. But by the time they reached the top, there was no Muhammad and there was none of his footprints. Eventually, the Meccans just had to give up and go all the way back down to Mecca. But all this while, unknown to them, Muhammad and his companion Abu Bakr had been hiding in a cave at the top of Mount Thawr. And when the coast was clear, they just simply continued on their journey towards Yathrib. It was now 622 AD, and Muhammad was in his early 50s. He had grown up in Mecca as an orphan. He had experienced some of the wider world with his uncle on many caravan trading trips. He had been married and had a family. He had received a series of divine revelations, but had been rejected by his own tribe. For over 10 years, he and his small band of about 200 followers had suffered extreme humiliation and persecution. Finally, with people plotting to assassinate him, he had fled his home to a place completely unknown to him. This event became known as the Hijra, literally a cutting off from the past. There was now no way back for Muhammad and his new movement.
He went as he'd preacher. He didn't go as a conqueror. They said, come here and be our judge. We're not going to accept you as prophet of God. We're just going to accept you as a prophet, a revered man whose word we trust. He didn't come with a conquering army. He came as a refugee, as an exile, as a dignified man of respect.
Muhammad was preaching Islam in Mecca for 13 years. He only had 150 followers, max. He is a very good calculator. He knew if he fought them from inside Mecca, he was going to lose. He left at the right time because he wanted to expand his message, and he went to the perfect location where he can actually hurt the Mecca people and conquer Mecca from outside, not from inside.
The Hijra, or migration from Mecca to Yathrib, is the turning point, if you like, in Muhammad's life.
When Muhammad and his followers first came here, what they found was nothing like the city of Mecca that they had left. Yathrib, as it was then known, was basically a large oasis, a series of villages, each village dominated by a different tribe. It was a situation that inevitably led to intense rivalries and conflict. Yathrib would later have its name changed in honor of Muhammad. It became known as Medina Nabi, the city of the Prophet, or Medina for short.
They arrived with nothing, and they immediately had to integrate themselves from being a great trading Meccan aristocracy to being poor, penniless, wearing the rags of their clothing in a very, very wealthy oasis, full of its own wealth hierarchies. They ground corn, they wove mats, and they fitted in.
When Muhammad came to Medina, what kind of a place was Medina?
Okay, Medina at that time, it wasn't a complete city. It was what you call sub-communities.
Collection of different tribes and communities. Yeah.
The center of Medina, which were the Prophet and the main of Al-Ansar, or the people of Medina. Yeah. And then you have people in Quba, you have people in Al-Qiblatain, and then you have the Jew, the east of Medina, and also in the south of Medina. So you have tribes surrounding Medina, but as a general, they call it Medina.
Muhammad's newfound freedom allowed him to build his own mosque. It became almost an extension of his own home. Tell me about when the Prophet Muhammad built his first mosque here in Medina.
He found the land in the center of Medina and he built this mosque.
But this mosque, the model that you have here, is very different from the one that is in Medina now, which is one of the biggest and grandest mosques in the world.
Yeah.
This is very simple.
Yeah, because at that time, try to imagine, you are talking about 14 centuries before. The building was very simple, about 35 meter by 35 meter. But it was similar to the building around Medina, which was built by mud and also stones in foundation and palm trees so they can cover part of the mosque, and they make an open area in the back of the mosque.
Now, that same mosque has been transformed into this, one of the biggest in the world, able to hold up to 500,000 worshippers at any one time. Muhammad used his mosque like a community center. He not only preached here, but also made it his office, where he could settle disputes, hold negotiations, and have public debates. Everyone was free to enter and speak with him. Jews, Christians, non-believers, even slaves. Above all, he and his followers could now come to the mosque and worship in relative peace. But they faced one practical problem. There was no effective means to tell people when it was time to pray. According to tradition, one day the Prophet Muhammad gathered everyone here in the courtyard of his mosque, where they wanted to discuss how the faithful should be called to prayer. Should it be like the Christians at the time, using bells, or the Jews who used the horn, or should it be something else, like using fire beacons? Eventually, after much discussion, it was decided that the new religion of Islam should be proclaimed with the human voice itself. The man Muhammad picked as the first person to announce the call for prayers was a very symbolic choice. Bilal, a freed African slave who had endured the most brutal persecution in Mecca. In Muhammad's time, slavery existed all over Arabia, and although he never abolished it, Muhammad and his companions did free slaves like Bilal. Every day, Bilal would climb to the rooftop of the mosque, and in a loud voice, he would call the faithful to prayer. This call to prayer has since become an integral part of Muslim life. Although the words used are the same the world over, each call has a distinctive sound, characteristic to its place. The mosque and its later distinctive tower or minaret would become one of the most identifiable Islamic symbols.
A mosque is not just a place of worship. A mosque is a focal point of community. It is a place where the transformative mission of Islam must be put into practice by services for the needy, services for the community, services to help people to achieve the objectives of Islam. It's a centre for education. That's what a mosque should be. It's not what an awful lot of mosques are today. And the other thing is that mosques have to be welcoming, open places, not just for Muslims, because the transformative mission, the social objectives of Islam don't belong just to Muslims, they are for everybody.
But Muhammad was now not only the prophet of a new religion, he was also effectively the political leader of the community here in Medina. And he fused these two roles right here in the courtyard of his mosque where he spent most of his days. Now, as his role grew, Muhammad decided that what he really needed was an agreement that would not only formalize his role in Medina, but also his relationship with the various tribes. It became known as the Constitution of Medina, and is thought to be one of the earliest written constitutions anywhere in the world. This was the first attempt in Arabia to form a state based not on tribal ties, but mutual interest. To do it, Muhammad had to win over the trust of both the pagan and Jewish tribes and make them work with each other and with his newly arrived Muslim community. Prince Hassan bin Talal of the Jordanian royal family is an expert on the Constitution of Medina.
The constitution was necessary for the establishment of a new diverse state in Medina, that is to say, Muslims, Jews, Christians. So it organized the relationship between Muslims, Jews, and non-Muslims on the basis of a recognition of the importance of respecting the lives, the properties, the places of worship, and in particular, ultimately, in respecting the relationship between the descendants of Abraham. It regulated rights and obligations. In a sense, it was a Magna Carta, if you will, of the Muslims. In the case of Medina, this was not a religious state. On the contrary, it was a civil state, and the government and the people were subject to the rule of law, which recognized their respective rights and encouraged them to live together.
No complete copies of the original documents have survived, and although a number of versions are found in early Muslim sources written about 100 years after Muhammad's death, some historians doubt its very existence.
Was there a Treaty of Medina? We only know this from one set of sources, which had their particular biases, their particular agendas. There are some historians who have the view that there wasn't a constitution at all and there wasn't a treaty, but that this was something made up subsequently. The job of the historian in those circumstances is extremely difficult. According to the Muslim chroniclers, there certainly was a treaty and there was a constitution. Incidentally, if you look at the constitution, there's nothing in that that would surprise you if you've immersed yourself in the political sociology of that period. It's absolutely unsurprising.
Thank you very much.
The Arabic used in it is very archaic. There is every reason to assume that this is a surviving document from that period, and it deals essentially with exactly the sort of practical things that you would imagine. What is going to be the position of Muhammad with regard to the tribes in Medina, with regard to the property of the people of Medina, and so on. It's a very it's not a blueprint for an empire.
The Constitution of Medina is the earliest known model of governance in Islam, and it clearly lays out the duties and the rights of citizens, as well as the responsibilities of those that govern them. For example, it clearly does away with the whole customary practice of vengeance and the practice of private justice, and establishes the rule of law.
This constitution, all the tribes of Medina, they sign it together.
Including the Jews, including the pagans?
Include everyone. They sign it to call what they call it Ummah. The
community?
Yeah, everyone is responsible for the protection of Medina, and they are equal against the law. They run a complete state with all its law. For example, if any two Jews fight each other, they will come to the Prophet and he will judge them not according to Islamic law, to the Jews' law. There is a complete court, everything is there as a state. So he built what you call it a complete civilized state in Arabia.
The interesting thing about the Constitution of Medina is that it recognized that all these people, pagan Arabs, as well as the Muslims, the Ansar and the Muhajirin, and the Christians in that city, were part of the same ummah, of the same nation. Nowadays, of course, Muslims often use the term ummah to mean the Muslim community. But that is not how it was used in that very first constitution of an Islamic state. So when people today say to me, we would like to create an Islamic state here or there, I say to them, will it be like the first one in Medina or not? And if not, why not?
Although it survived throughout his lifetime, after his death, Muhammad's constitution of Medina was first changed and later completely discarded by later Muslim leaders.
This is one of the worst problems that we have today. To me, the most important part of the example of the Prophet and the message of the Quran is the acceptance of plurality. The need for and the realization that there are many faiths, many ways, and all are capable of being a community, an ummah together. I think Muslims marginalize this message. I think they fail to hold it as the central principle of social existence, and by doing that, they actually defy the example of the Prophet.